Good morning. We are in our second week of a 6-week series based in the book of Psalms. Each week during this series, we're listening as one of our members reads the psalm aloud to us, and then we're also listening as this group, Poor Bishop Hooper, sings the psalm to us. The psalms that we're focusing on in this series are a particular kind of psalm. There are different psalms in our Bibles. And the psalms that we're looking at in this series are called enthronement psalms. They're called enthronement psalms because each one of these psalms, somewhere in the psalm, explicitly says, God reigns. Let's say that out loud. God reigns. And these psalms ask us to be very intentional about this statement because they understand that there are things going on in our lives and in our world that might lead us to believe just the opposite, that God doesn't reign, that God is not enthroned, that God is not in charge. And so they ask us to make a conscious choice about this and to live as if we believed that this truly is the case, that God reigns, despite what's happening in our lives. And so this series is called As If. It's an invitation for all of us, despite what's happening in the world or in our hearts, to live as if God truly does reign. I want to begin with a health advisory that was released by the U.S. Surgeon General a couple of weeks ago. A health advisory by the U.S. Surgeon General is a pretty important thing. It's released only when there's deemed to be a significant threat to the health of the American public and a threat that demands immediate and urgent attention and action. But the subject of this health advisory was somewhat surprising. This was the title, Our Epidemic of Loneliness and Isolation. And here is the slide that summarized all the findings in this health advisory. Lacking social connection is as dangerous as smoking up to 15 cigarettes a day. And more dangerous, the rest of that graph goes on to show, more dangerous than drinking 6 alcoholic drinks a day, more dangerous than physical inactivity, more dangerous than obesity, more dangerous than air pollution. The U.S. Surgeon General wants the American public to know that loneliness is killing us. And so this quote from the study, social isolation is objectively having few social relationships, social roles, group memberships, and infrequent social interaction. On the other hand, loneliness is a subjective internal state. It's the distressing experience that results from perceived isolation or unmet need between an individual's preferred and actual experience. Both of these, loneliness and social isolation, increase the risk for premature death by 26% and 29%. So there are two things here. One is objective, that's social isolation, just the objective measure of how many friendships you have. The other is subjective, loneliness, that internal feeling of being disconnected regardless of how many friendships you have. And these two things, the Surgeon General is telling us, are killing us. They make it far more likely that we will die a premature death. The document looked at a variety of studies looking at the percent of U.S. adults experiencing health issues. These are all self-reported. So 13% of American adults report dealing with health issues related to smoking. 15% report health issues related to diabetes. 42% report health issues related to obesity. 50% of American adults report health issues related to loneliness. More Americans are struggling with the health issue of loneliness than any other health issue in the present moment. A range of studies looking at the average time that we spend alone. So in 2003, it was 285 minutes a day. By 2020, it was 330 minutes a day, an increase of 24 hours a month. The average person listening to me right now is spending an additional day every month disconnected socially from other people. Studies looking at the average time spent in social engagement, the flip side of this, how much time are we engaging with people socially? In 2003, it was 60 minutes a day. About 1 hour of your day was spent engaging socially with other people. By 2020, it had dropped to 20 minutes. Most of us are barely spending 20 minutes socially engaged with other people. That's a decrease of 20 hours a month. And then studies looking at our participation in faith communities, mosques, synagogues, churches. In 1999, it was 70%. This is self-reported. By 2020, it had dropped to 47%. It was the first time in history that this survey has been taken when that number dropped below 50%. Increasingly, we are spending even our spiritual pursuits disconnected from relationships. And this loneliness, this social isolation, the U.S. Surgeon General is warning, is killing us. Now, Psalm 95 has something to say about that. Psalm 95 is not only an enthronement psalm telling us that God reigns, but it is also a communal psalm. Most of the psalms in the psalm book are either individual or communal. Individual psalms feel like they've been written by just one individual, and they're speaking to just one individual, trying to get me, myself, and I to do something, to change something, to say something. But communal psalms feel like they're written by a community of people, addressing a community of people, trying to get us to do something, to say something, to engage in some way. And Psalm 95 is one of those communal psalms. So listen again to the communal language. Oh, come, let us sing to the Lord. Let us make a joyful noise to the rock of our salvation. Let us come into his presence with thanksgiving. Let us make a joyful noise to him with songs of praise. For the Lord is a great God and a great King above all gods. In his hand are the depths of the earth. The height of the mountains are his also. The sea is his, for he made it, and the dry land which his hands have formed. O come, let us worship and bow down. Let us kneel before the Lord, our Maker. For he is our God, and we are the people of his pasture, the sheep of his hand. Now, there's a lot going on with this communal language, but I think in one way it comes down to this. It's easier for me to live as if God is still reigning when I'm part of a we living as if God is still reigning. Let's be honest, it is difficult to live sometimes as if God is still reigning. As we saw last Sunday in Psalm 93, there are floods that sweep into our lives, that overwhelm us and lead us to doubt the reign of God. But when I drag myself into a church building, in person or online, and I hear someone in a Bible class testify with confidence to the reign of God in their life, or I hear a call to worship where someone speaks with conviction about the reign of God in their life or our life, or I join my voice to the voices of others in singing songs that touch on the reign of God, or I talk in the hallway or the foyer or outside after a worship service with someone who shares something about the reign of God, it suddenly becomes a little easier for me to believe that God reigns. Last Sunday, after the sermon from Psalm 93, two of you independently came and spoke with me afterwards and shared stories of God's reign in your life. And as I listened to your conviction, I felt my own conviction grow. It is easier for me to live as if God is still reigning when I'm part of a we who are living as if God is still reigning. Now, this psalm also acknowledges the tension involved in this. The first 2/3 of the psalm are filled with joy and with praise about the reign of God, but the last third of the psalm is a picture of bitterness and hardness of heart. It describes a time in the life of Israel when they are at Masa Meribah. They are starving, they're dehydrated, circumstances are grim, death feels like it is imminent, and they cry aloud, Exodus 17, Numbers 20, is God with us or not? Translation, does God reign or not? There is bitterness and hardness of heart that we experience when it doesn't feel like God is reigning. And so the psalm itself deals with this tension between the joyful experience of delighting in the reign of God and the bitter experience of doubting the reign of God. And when we experience that bitterness, the psalm is inviting us back into the throng of people who still believe that God reigns. Scholars tell us that the language of this psalm is the language of procession. So we should imagine some faith leaders inviting all of us to join a great procession of people who believe God reigns. And so the faith leaders tell us in verse 1, come join the crowd. Oh, come. Let us sing to the Lord. Let us make a joyful noise to the rock of our salvation. Get up out of your chair. Leave that room where you've been locked all day long. And come and be part of the crowd who believes in the reign of God. And then in verse 2, the faith leaders invite us to enter the doors of the sanctuary because we've arrived at the place of worship of God. And they say, let us come into his presence with thanksgiving. Let us make a joyful noise to him with songs of praise. And so we find ourselves now swept along with the crowd, moving through the doors of the sanctuary, finally entering the sanctuary itself. And once here, the faith leaders invite us to worship. Oh, come, let us worship and bow down. Let us kneel before the Lord, our Maker. The entire psalm is an invitation for us to leave the solitude of our lives, to leave the loneliness of our lives, and to join the we, worshiping God and praising him for his reign. It's telling us it's easier for me to live as if God is still reigning when I'm part of a we, the great procession, living as if God is still reigning. And then the rest of the psalm is filled with reasons why we would bow down and worship this God. Verses 3-5 invite us to join the crowd because we're all part of God's great creation. For the Lord is a great God and a great King above all gods. In his hand are the depths of the earth. The heights of the mountains are his also. The sea is his, for he made it. The dry land which his hands have formed. The psalmist is reminding me that I'm not just me. I am part of something much larger than me. I am part of the great creation of God. And as I look out the window, as I see the sea, as I see the mountains, as I look at the high places and the low places, I remember that I'm not just me. I'm part of the we that is the creation of God. And then verse 7 invites us to join this crowd because we all belong to this great God. For he is our God, and we are the people of his pasture and the sheep of his hand. The psalmist reminds us that regardless of our gender, our ethnicity, our sexuality, our education, our age, we are all part of the people of God. I belong to something much greater than me. I belong to this we, the people of God, the sheep of his hand. And so the psalm is telling us, it is easier for me to live as if God is still reigning when I'm part of the we living as if God is still reigning. Wendell Berry has written a book called Remembering, and he tells the story of an old farmer in Kentucky named Andy. It's harvest time, and Andy is harvesting his corn. And despite his long experience with this machine, on this day, some clothing on his right sleeve gets snagged by the harvesting machine and drags his hand into it and maims his hand. He doesn't lose the hand, but he loses the use of that hand. And he can't believe that this has happened to him. He's such a seasoned farmer, and he feels such shame for this injury to his hand. He eventually is in conversation with his wife, and she says, "What did you do to your hand?" And he feels such shame regarding the injury of his hand. And so Barry says that Andy begins to shut himself off from other people. He begins to withdraw from other people in his life at just the very moment when he really needs to be leaning into them. Another farmer in the community named Danny knows what happened to Andy and sees what is happening to Andy. And so this young farmer just begins to come alongside Andy and visits him at his farm and steps in where he feels like he can offer some help. And they spend more and more time together, and they begin to sort of move in unison. And Andy also begins spending time with Danny at his farm, offering some wisdom from his years of experience of farming. And at one point, Danny says to Andy, "Between the two of us, we have three hands. And everybody," he says, "everybody needs three hands." And I think that's one of the things that Psalm 95 is telling us. Everybody needs three hands. Because there are times when, perhaps due to no fault of our own, there's something about our heart or our soul, our spirit, our mind that's maimed. And it becomes difficult to live as if God still reigns. And that's when we need the we to come alongside us and help us to live the reign of God. Gordon MacDonald writes of visiting one of the AA recovery groups that were meeting in the church where he pastored. And at this particular meeting, a newcomer had joined the group for the first time. Her name was Kathy. And her hair was greasy and disheveled. Her eyes were red and watery. Her teeth were rotted from drug and alcohol use. Her skin was splotchy. In the last month, she said, I've been in 5 states. For 5 nights, she said, I've been sleeping under bridges. I've been assaulted. I've been robbed, and I can't stop drinking. And she just wept aloud in front of this group of strangers. Marilyn was seated right next to her. Marilyn had been sober for 12 years. And Marilyn just reached over to Kathy and drew her into herself. It's going to be okay, she said to Kathy. We're going to do this together, she said to Kathy. All you have to do is keep coming here. And I think in some ways that's what Psalm 95 is telling us as well. It's going to be okay. We're going to do this together. All you have to do is keep coming here. The Lord reigns. The Lord reigns. The Lord reigns.
Oh, come, let us sing to the Lord. Let us make joyful noise to the rock of our salvation. Let us come unto him with thanksgiving and songs of praise. Oh, come, let us sing to the Lord. Let us make joyful noise to the rock of our salvation. Let us come unto him with thanksgiving and songs of praise. In his hand are the depths of the earth, the heights of the mountain. The sea is his, formed by his hands, and the dry land he made it. Oh, come, let us sing to the Lord. Let us make joyful noise to the rock of our salvation. Let us come unto him with thanksgiving and songs of praise. This day, if you hear his voice, do not harden your hearts. As the day in the wilderness, as your fathers did. Let us worship and bow. Let us kneel down before our Maker, for He is God, and we are the people, the sheep of His pasture. Oh, come, let us worship and bow. Let us kneel down before we